The Reluctant Alliance. Raymond Chase sat in the dimly lit corner of the Rusty Anchor, a rundown bar tucked into the shadowy edges of New Singapore's sprawling spaceport. The warm glow of neon lights seeped in through the cracks of the shuttered windows, painting the scarred veteran's face in shades of green and purple. His cybernetic hand gripped a glass of cheap whiskey, the burn from the drink a familiar comfort against the memories that haunted him. On the holoscreen above the bar, news scrolled about yet another Zarian royal assassination, a distant, irrelevant event to most, but not to Raymond. For years, Raymond had fought in the Alliance's wars against the Zarian Empire, witnessing firsthand the atrocities of the green-skinned aristocracy. Plasma burns twisted half his face, a lasting souvenir of their brutality. Now, with the war over and the Zarian Empire fractured, all he wanted was peace. That peace was interrupted when a sharp voice cut through the ambient noise. Captain Raymond Chase. Raymond didn't bother looking up. Not a captain anymore, he muttered. A woman in a sleek black suit slid onto the stool beside him, her polished demeanor at odds with the gritty bar. She placed a glowing holopad on the counter, the device humming with life. The Alliance thinks otherwise. We need your expertise. Raymond scoffed. Find someone else. I'm done being a puppet. The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she tapped the pad, projecting an image of a striking young Zarian woman. Her emerald skin gleamed under the holographic light, her regal features etched with a confidence born of privilege. Raymond's hand froze mid-drink. Princess Carla, the woman said. Last surviving heir of the Zarian royal family. The rebels will execute her if they find her. Raymond's laugh was bitter. You want me to babysit a spoiled princess? After everything her kind did to my unit on Proxima? It's not a request. You know their tactics better than anyone. And despite your cynicism, you still have a conscience. She leaned in, her voice low and pointed. The princess is innocent of her empire's crimes. Protecting her could be the key to preventing further chaos. Raymond's lips curled in disdain, but when the agent slid another holopad forward displaying a payment offer, he hesitated. The amount was staggering, enough to escape the cesspool of the spaceport and start over somewhere quiet. Where is she? He asked begrudgingly. 20 minutes later, Raymond found himself standing in the lavish corridor of the Diamond Palace Hotel, its walls lined with gold trim and rare gemstones. His combat boots sank into the plush carpet, a sharp contrast to the dingy streets he was used to. The door to the presidential suite opened before he could knock, revealing Princess Carla herself. She stood in the doorway, an elegant sundress tangled awkwardly around her, its straps twisted and backward. Finally. You must help me with this contraption, she exclaimed, exasperated. Raymond blinked. He hadn't expected someone so poised and regal to be utterly incapable of dressing herself. Her dark hair framed a face of striking beauty, her glowing green skin untouched by the scars of war. These earth garments are barbaric, she huffed, struggling with the dress. How do commoners manage without handmaidens? Raymond pinched the bridge of his nose. Your Highness, he began, his tone sharp, I'm your security detail, not your personal servant. Her eyes narrowed as she took in his rugged appearance, from the plasma burns on his face to his cybernetic arm. They sent a soldier. How quaint. A soldier who's going to keep you alive, Raymond retorted, brushing past her into the suite. He scanned the room, his eyes darting to potential security weaknesses. If you can manage not to strangle yourself with that dress, that is. Carla glared. How dare you? She stepped forward, her foot catching on the hem of her dress. She stumbled, falling directly into Raymond's chest. For a moment, they both froze. Her scent was a mix of exotic flowers and something distinctly alien. Raymond steadied her, his cybernetic hand firm at her waist. First lesson, Princess, he said, setting her upright. If you want to survive, learn to dress yourself. We leave in 10 minutes. Carla's eyes widened. Leave? I've only just arrived, and my gowns haven't even been unpacked. There are rebels hunting you. This location isn't secure. Raymond's voice was clipped, his focus already on their next move. Pack light. 1 bag. Practical clothes only. But I don't have practical clothes, she protested. Then wear something that doesn't glow or sparkle, he snapped, checking his weapons. Carla drew herself up regally, despite the disheveled state of her dress. I don't take orders from common soldiers. Raymond didn't even glance at her. 8 minutes, he said coldly. Then I'm dragging you out of here. Dressed or not. Her face flushed a deeper shade of green, but she turned and began rummaging through her luggage. Raymond continued his sweep of the suite, noting the open sniper angles from the neighboring building and the oversized ventilation shafts perfect for drone infiltration. Just as the princess managed to untangle her dress, a sharp whine pierced the air. Raymond's combat instincts kicked in. Down, he barked, pulling her to the floor as a plasma bolt scorched the wall behind them. Her face was pale as she whispered, "They're here." Raymond drew his sidearm, his expression grim. "Welcome to reality, princess. Now, stay behind me and run." As they bolted for the service exit, Carla clutched a worn leather jacket Raymond had tossed her way. The smell of sweat and battle clung to it, a stark contrast to her usual opulence. "This is outrageous," she hissed as they descended a narrow stairwell, plasma bolts ringing out behind them. "Outrageous is dying because you can't pack practical shoes," Raymond shot back. The banter continued even as they reached the bottom level, but the unspoken truth hung heavily between them: the princess's life, and maybe even Raymond's peace, depended on their survival. Into the shadows. The service tunnels of New Singapore were a stark contrast to the opulence of the Diamond Palace Hotel. Dim lights flickered along the metallic walls, and the hum of machinery echoed in the cramped corridors. Raymond led the way, his step steady and deliberate, his sidearm gripped tightly. Behind him, Princess Carla stumbled, her bare feet occasionally slipping on the grimy floor. "This place smells like," Carla began, her nose wrinkling in disdain. "Survival," Raymond interrupted, not bothering to glance back. "Get used to it." She stopped mid-step, glaring at his broad back. "You don't have to be so rude. I'm risking everything being here." Raymond turned, his expression flat. "You're risking everything because you don't have a choice. If you want to stay alive, you'll follow my lead. Now move." Carla swallowed her retort and kept walking, though her discomfort was evident in every step. Her world of luxury and pampered existence had not prepared her for this level of indignity. The hidden dangers. Raymond's tactical display projected a map of the tunnels onto his cybernetic eye. The rebels were closing in. He knew the tunnels offered limited escape routes, but he also knew them better than most. Years of covert missions had taught him the value of knowing your environment. They reached a junction, and Raymond paused, scanning their options. He could hear faint footsteps in the distance, rebel scouts sweeping the area. He gestured for Carla to stay quiet. For once, she obeyed, pressing herself against the wall and trying to make herself as inconspicuous as possible. "Where are we going?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Out of sight." "Into the common districts," Raymond replied. "Blend in, disappear." Carla looked horrified. "Disappear? I'm not some commoner you can throw into the streets." Raymond shot her a glare. "Your title is a target. The rebels don't care if you're a princess or a pauper. They'll kill you all the same." His words silenced her protests, though her lips pressed into a tight line. She hated this, but the fear in her eyes betrayed her understanding. The common districts. After navigating through a maze of tunnels, they emerged into the underground markets. The transition was jarring. The air was thick with the scent of spices and grease, the chatter of countless languages echoing in the bustling marketplace. Neon signs flickered above makeshift stalls, and the crowd was a chaotic mix of humans, aliens, and androids. "Stay close," Raymond muttered, keeping his hand on his weapon. He guided Carla through the throng, his sharp eyes scanning for any signs of trouble. Carla tried to keep up, but her bare feet were blistered and bleeding from the rough journey. She winced with every step but refused to complain. Her pride wouldn't allow it. "Does everyone live like this?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Most people don't have palaces or servants," Raymond replied without looking at her. "This is what survival looks like." She fell silent, her gaze drifting over the crowded stalls. For the first time, she began to see the stark contrast between her life of privilege and the struggles of the people around her. It was a humbling realization, one that left her feeling small and insignificant. Danger lurks. Raymond suddenly tensed, his instincts kicking in. He grabbed Carla's arm and pulled her into the shadow of a nearby stall. A group of armed rebels entered the market, their eyes scanning the crowd. "They've got our trail," Raymond muttered. He glanced at Carla, who was trembling beside him. "Keep your head down. Let me do the talking." Carla nodded, her usual defiance replaced by fear. She clutched the worn leather jacket Raymond had given her, its weight oddly comforting. The rebels approached, their weapons slung casually over their shoulders. One of them, a grizzled man with a scar running across his face, stopped near their hiding spot. His sharp gaze swept over the crowd, lingering for a moment too long on their corner. Raymond stepped forward, his posture relaxed but ready for action. "Looking for something?" he asked, his tone casual. The scarred man sneered. "Just passing through. Seen anyone unusual? Green skin, royal attitude?" Raymond shook his head. "Haven't seen anyone like that. Just trying to get some supplies." The man's eyes narrowed, but before he could press further, a commotion erupted nearby. A thief had been caught trying to pickpocket a merchant, and the chaos drew the rebels' attention. "Let's move," Raymond whispered to Carla. He guided her deeper into the market, using the distraction to put distance between them and their pursuers. A moment of reflection. They finally stopped in a quiet alley, the sounds of the market fading into the background. Carla sank to the ground, her legs trembling with exhaustion. She looked up at Raymond, her face pale. "Is this what you had to live through during the war?" she asked softly. Raymond leaned against the wall, his gaze distant. "War doesn't leave room for comfort. You learn to adapt or you die. There's no middle ground." Carla lowered her head, her usual confidence shattered. "I didn't know. I didn't realize how much people suffered because of us." Raymond studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You're seeing it now. That's a start." For the first time, there was no bitterness in his tone, only a hint of understanding. The chase resumes. Their moment of quiet was short-lived. A distant shout echoed through the alley, and Raymond's tactical display lit up with warnings. The rebels had found them again. "Get up," he said, pulling Carla to her feet. "We need to keep moving." Carla stumbled but managed to stay upright. She was learning, slowly but surely. Together, they disappeared into the maze of the underground districts, the shadows their only ally. Learning to survive. The damp air of the underground safe house clung to Carla's skin as she sat on the edge of a metal cot, her once perfect composure fractured. She watched Raymond as he worked methodically, checking the charge on his plasma pistol and inspecting the rusted locks on the heavy steel door. Every movement he made was calculated, efficient, and utterly detached from the chaotic world she had known until now. His silence weighed heavily on her, a stark reminder of how far she had fallen from her sheltered life. Her feet throbbed, raw from the brutal escape through the underground market. The smell of grease and metal filled the room, mingling with the faint acrid tang of ozone that seemed to follow Raymond wherever he went. She wanted to lash out at him, blame him for her predicament, but deep down, she knew the fault wasn't his. The rebels, her fractured empire, even her own naive expectations, all of it had led her here. Raymond finally turned to her, his expression as unreadable as ever. You need to be ready to move at a moment's notice. This place won't stay safe for long. Carla's eyes flicked to the single duffel bag he had tossed at her earlier. Inside were a few basic clothes he had scavenged from the market, none of which she would have ever considered wearing before. I don't even know where to start, she admitted quietly. You start by forgetting everything you used to be, Raymond said, his voice cold. No one cares if you're a princess anymore. Out here, you're just another target. She swallowed hard, her pride warring with the growing realization that he was right. For all her royal training, her etiquette lessons, and her carefully curated public image, none of it mattered now. Survival was the only currency in this world, and she had none. Raymond crossed the room, dropping a worn leather jacket beside her. Put that on. It's not much, but it'll make you less noticeable. She picked up the jacket gingerly, her fingers brushing against the frayed edges. It smelled faintly of sweat and smoke, and she hesitated before slipping it on. The fabric was rough against her skin, a far cry from the luxurious silks and velvets she was accustomed to. But when she met Raymond's gaze, she saw no sympathy there, only a challenge. He handed her a compact stun baton, its surface scarred from years of use. Do you even know how to use this? Her fingers curled around the weapon as she shook her head. No. Figures, he muttered. Without another word, he activated the baton, the tip crackling with blue energy. He showed her how to grip it properly, how to brace herself for the recoil, and where to aim for maximum effect. His instructions were curt and direct, but she could sense the underlying urgency in every word. As he guided her through the motions, she couldn't help but notice the scars on his hands, the way his cybernetic arm moved with precise efficiency. This man had fought more battles than she could imagine, and he carried the weight of each one with him. For the first time, she felt a flicker of respect for him, even if she didn't fully understand his world. Hours passed as he drilled her on basic survival skills. How to spot an ambush, how to move without drawing attention, how to blend into a crowd. She stumbled through the exercises, her frustration growing with each mistake. But Raymond was relentless, pushing her until she began to grasp the basics. By the time they stopped, she was drenched in sweat, her muscles aching from exertion. You're learning, he said gruffly, and though his tone was harsh, she caught a faint glimmer of approval in his eyes. Exhausted, Carla sank back onto the cot, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Do you ever stop? She asked, her voice edged with irritation. Not if you want to live, he replied. The rebels won't. Neither can you. She wanted to argue, to tell him she wasn't cut out for this life, but she held her tongue. Every time she thought about giving up, she remembered the plasma bolts that had chased them through the market, the cold certainty of death that had been just a heartbeat away. Raymond was right, she didn't have a choice. As she rested, her gaze wandered to the small holopad Raymond had left on the table. It displayed a map of New Singapore, marked with danger zones and potential escape routes. She realized how much effort he had put into keeping her alive, despite his obvious disdain for her and everything she represented. It wasn't loyalty to the alliance or any sense of duty that drove him. It was something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. The sound of footsteps outside the door snapped her out of her thoughts. Raymond was already on his feet, his weapon drawn and his body tensed like a coiled spring. He motioned for her to stay quiet, and she obeyed without question. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped. Carla held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, there was only silence, broken by the faint hum of machinery. Then the footsteps moved on, fading into the distance. Raymond lowered his weapon but didn't relax. They're getting closer, he said. We'll have to move soon. Carla nodded, her fear mingling with a newfound determination. She wasn't ready to give up yet. Not when there was still a chance to survive, to prove to herself and to Raymond that she was more than just a helpless princess. "Teach me more," she said suddenly, surprising even herself with the firmness in her voice. "I need to be ready." Raymond raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. But after a moment, he nodded. "Fine. Just don't expect me to hold your hand." "I don't need you to," she replied, her jaw set. "Just show me what to do." For the first time, Raymond allowed himself a small, fleeting smile. "We'll see." As the two prepared to face the dangers ahead, Carla couldn't help but feel that something inside her had shifted. She was no longer the same princess who had fumbled with a sundress in a gilded hotel suite. She was still scared, still unsure of herself, but she was starting to see a path forward. And for the first time, she thought she might actually survive. The smuggler's betrayal. The stolen moments of calm didn't last long. Raymond's network of old contacts in New Singapore had provided a lead, a smuggler named Greg, known for slipping people and goods past the planet's tight security. The rendezvous was set in the sprawling industrial docks, a labyrinth of shipping crates, automated loaders, and the persistent hiss of steam vents. It was far from safe, but for now, it was the only option. Carla followed Raymond through the chaotic maze, her steps more confident than they had been days before. She was still adjusting to the uncomfortable boots he had found for her, but at least she wasn't barefoot anymore. The jacket he'd given her was oversized, its tattered edges brushing her thighs, but it helped her blend in among the workers and wanderers who filled the docks. They stopped at an unmarked door tucked between two towering storage units. Raymond knocked twice, paused, then knocked 3 more times. The door slid open, revealing a hulking alien figure with leathery purple skin and tusks that jutted from his lower jaw. Greg loomed over them, his yellow eyes narrowing as he took in the pair. "You're late," Greg growled, his voice a low rumble. Raymond shrugged. "Traffic." Greg's eyes lingered on Carla, who stiffened under his scrutiny. "This the package?" "Client," Raymond corrected, his tone sharp. "She's coming with us. No questions." The smuggler snorted but stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of engine grease and something metallic. A battered transport ship sat in the center of the hangar, its hull scarred and patched in places. It didn't look like much, but it was functional, and functional was all they needed. "Payment up front," Greg said, holding out a hand the size of a small boulder. Raymond handed over a credit chip, his expression grim. "Get us off-world, clean and quiet. No complications." The smuggler examined the chip, a satisfied grin spreading across his face. "No complications," he repeated, though the gleam in his eyes set Raymond on edge. They boarded the ship, the narrow corridors barely wide enough to accommodate Greg's bulk. Carla followed closely behind Raymond, her unease growing with every step. Something about the smuggler felt off, though she couldn't put her finger on it. She had learned to trust Raymond's instincts, and she could see the tension in his posture as he scanned their surroundings. The cargo bay was cramped and smelled faintly of damp metal. Raymond directed Carla to sit on a bench bolted to the wall while he inspected the area. She folded her arms tightly, trying to suppress her discomfort. The hard bench and the cold, sterile atmosphere were a far cry from the comfort she once took for granted. "Relax," Greg said, leaning against the doorway with an unsettling grin. "We'll be out of here before you know it." Raymond ignored him, his focus on a console in the corner. As he checked the ship's systems, something caught his attention, a faint but distinct signal on the scanner. His jaw tightened. "Greg," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Why is there an encrypted transmission coming from your ship?" The smuggler's grin widened, revealing sharp, uneven teeth. "Just making sure I get my full payment." Carla's stomach dropped as realization dawned. "You sold us out." Before she could say anything more, Greg moved, his massive frame blocking the exit. "It's just business." The rebels pay better than you do, and they're on their way. Raymond moved faster than Carla thought possible. In a blur, he drew his plasma pistol and fired, forcing Greg to dive for cover. The shot missed, scorching the wall, but it bought them a precious second of advantage. "Stay behind me." Raymond barked at Carla as he pushed her toward the back of the cargo bay. She stumbled but obeyed, her heart pounding as Greg's enraged roars echoed through the ship. The smuggler lunged at Raymond, his size making up for his lack of speed. Raymond ducked under the swing of a massive arm, his movements precise and practiced. He fired again, this time hitting Greg in the shoulder. The alien snarled in pain but didn't go down. Carla pressed herself against the wall, her mind racing. She spotted the stun baton Raymond had given her earlier, forgotten on the bench. Without thinking, she grabbed it, her fingers fumbling to activate the weapon. The crackling energy made her hands shake, but she gripped it tightly, her gaze locked on the chaotic fight. Raymond and Greg grappled, the smuggler's brute strength meeting the soldier's relentless determination. Greg managed to slam Raymond against a bulkhead, the impact sending a shudder through the ship. Carla's breath hitched as she watched Raymond stagger but recover, his cybernetic arm swinging up to block another blow. When Greg turned slightly, Carla saw her chance. Summoning every ounce of courage she had, she lunged forward and jammed the stun baton into the smuggler's side. The crackling energy surged through him, and he howled in pain, his massive body convulsing before collapsing to the floor. Raymond stared at her, his expression a mix of surprise and approval. "Not bad, princess." She swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she dropped the baton. He was going to kill you." "Yeah, and he still might if we don't move." Raymond stepped over Greg's unconscious form and started toward the cockpit. "The rebels are probably already here." The sound of approaching footsteps confirmed his words. Carla followed him, her fear momentarily overshadowed by adrenaline. As they reached the cockpit, Raymond activated the ship's engines, the vessel rumbling to life beneath them. "They'll try to stop us," Carla said, her voice shaky. "Let them try," Raymond replied, his tone grim. "We're not staying to find out." The ship lifted off, its thrusters roaring as it broke free of the dock. Rebel fighters swarmed below, their shouts barely audible over the deafening engines. Raymond piloted the ship with precision, navigating through the cluttered airspace and out into the void of space. As the stars stretched out before them, Carla let out a shaky breath. They had escaped, but only just. She glanced at Raymond, his focus unwavering as he set a course away from the planet. "Thank you," she said quietly. He didn't look at her, but his lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. "Don't thank me yet. This is only the beginning." Carla nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. She had survived another day, but the journey ahead was far from over. Revelations and sacrifices. The stolen smuggler's ship drifted in the quiet void of space, its patched hull holding steady despite the stress of their hasty escape. Carla sat in the co-pilot's seat, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. It had been hours since they had left New Singapore behind, and yet her heart still pounded as if they were moments from another ambush. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the unfamiliar controls under Raymond's gruff instruction. "Steady," Raymond said without looking up. His focus was on the navigation system, plotting their next move. "We're clear for now, but that won't last. Rebels don't give up easily." Carla's lips pressed into a thin line as she forced her hands to steady. Her thoughts drifted back to the smuggler's betrayal and the chaos that had followed. She had acted on instinct when she had used the stun baton, but now that the adrenaline had worn off, doubt crept in. Could she do it again if she had to? Could she take a life to save her own? Raymond leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "We're headed for a neutral colony. Small place, off the radar. They should have resources we can use and a place to lie low. Will they help us?" Carla asked, her voice quiet. They'll help you, he replied. Zarian refugees are scattered all over the system. If they know who you are, they'll protect you. She hesitated, sensing the unspoken part of his statement. And you? Raymond's cybernetic hand tightened on the edge of the console. Let's just say I'm not exactly popular among your kind. Carla frowned but didn't press further. She had learned that Raymond shared only what he deemed necessary, and prying wouldn't get her anywhere. The colony came into view hours later, a small station orbiting a barren moon. Its design was practical and unadorned, a stark contrast to the grandeur Carla was accustomed to. As the ship docked, she felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. These were her people, but she had never truly known them. The life of a royal had kept her insulated, far removed from the struggles of the Zarian commoners. Raymond powered down the engines and stood, checking his sidearm before nodding toward the exit. Stay close. Don't trust anyone. The colony's interior was dimly lit, its halls narrow and utilitarian. Zarian refugees moved about, their green skin and glowing eyes marking them as unmistakably alien. Carla's presence drew immediate attention. Whispers spread through the crowd, some eyes filled with awe, others with suspicion. An older Zarian man approached, his posture stiff but respectful. Princess Carla, he said, bowing slightly. It is an honor to have you here. We have heard of your survival. Carla offered a tentative smile. Thank you. We seek only shelter and anonymity. The man nodded but glanced warily at Raymond. And this, human? Why is he with you? Raymond stepped forward, his voice cold. I'm the reason she's still alive. The tension between them was palpable, but Carla intervened before it could escalate. He's my protector. Without him, I wouldn't have made it this far. The man's expression softened slightly, though his mistrust lingered. Very well. You are both welcome, but I urge caution. The rebels have ears everywhere. They were shown to a small room, barely more than a storage closet, but it was private and secure. Raymond immediately began checking the walls for surveillance devices, his paranoia well-founded. Carla sat on the edge of the lone cot, her exhaustion catching up with her. Why do they hate us so much? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Raymond paused, turning to face her. You really don't know? She shook her head. I was sheltered, protected. They never told me the truth about the rebellion. Raymond sighed, leaning against the wall. Your empire wasn't just about power, it was about control. Resources, territory, people. They took what they wanted and crushed anyone who resisted. And when the rebels rose up, the Zarian elite fought back with every weapon they had. Millions died, on both sides. Carla's eyes filled with tears. She had heard whispers of the atrocities, but they had always been dismissed as propaganda. Now, hearing it from Raymond, she couldn't ignore the weight of the truth. Not everyone was like that, she said, her voice trembling. My parents, they wanted peace. Raymond's expression hardened. Then they failed. And now, you're paying the price for their mistakes. The words stung, but Carla couldn't deny them. She had inherited not only the crown but also the consequences of generations of oppression. The weight of it threatened to crush her, but she knew she couldn't let it. If she gave in to despair, everything her family had fought for would be lost. Their uneasy truce was interrupted by a knock at the door. A young Zarian woman entered, her expression urgent. There's been a security breach. Rebel scouts have been spotted near the colony. Raymond was on his feet in an instant. How long? Minutes, maybe less, she replied. He grabbed Carla's arm, pulling her toward the exit. We're leaving. Now. The colony descended into chaos as alarms blared and refugees scattered. Carla's heart pounded as they navigated the crowded halls, Raymond leading the way with his weapon drawn. The rebels had found them, and this time, there was no guarantee of escape. As they reached the docking bay, Carla glanced back at the fleeing refugees. Many of them wouldn't make it. The realization hit her like a physical blow, her presence had put them all in danger. "We can't just leave them," she said, stopping in her tracks. Raymond turned, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "If we stay, we die. You die." Carla's jaw clenched as she met his gaze. "If I abandon them, I'm no better than the rebels." For a moment, Raymond looked as though he might argue, but then he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Fine. But don't make me regret this." They turned back, joining the colony's makeshift defenders in the frantic fight to hold off the rebels. Plasma fire lit up the docking bay as the two sides clashed, the air thick with smoke and desperation. Carla stayed close to Raymond, her stun baton clutched tightly in her hands. Amid the chaos, she found herself giving orders, coordinating the defense as best she could. To her surprise, the refugees listened, their fear giving way to determination. For the first time, Carla felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could survive this. The final stand. The docking bay was a battlefield of smoke and fire, its metallic walls reverberating with the deafening clash of plasma bolts and shouted commands. Carla crouched behind an overturned crate, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. Beside her, Raymond was a pillar of unshakable focus, his plasma pistol firing with precision. Every shot he took bought the defenders precious seconds, but the rebels kept coming. The refugees had rallied under Carla's leadership, hastily assembling makeshift barricades and arming themselves with whatever tools and weapons they could find. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. For many of them, this was their last stand, a desperate attempt to protect their home and their lives. Carla's hands trembled as she gripped the stun baton Raymond had given her. She had used it before, but the thought of facing another opponent sent a wave of fear through her. She glanced at Raymond, who was reloading his weapon with calm efficiency. "Stay low," he said without looking at her. "Pick your moments. You don't have to fight every battle, just the ones that matter." His words steadied her, though the fear didn't entirely vanish. She peeked over the edge of the crate, her sharp eyes catching the movement of rebel scouts flanking their position. Heart pounding, she turned to Raymond. "They're trying to surround us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. "They're smarter than I gave them credit for. We need to cut them off before they pin us down." Carla nodded, her fear slowly giving way to determination. "What do you need me to do?" Raymond hesitated for the briefest of moments, then handed her a small device, a compact explosive charge. "There's a narrow corridor on the west side. If you can plant this, it'll collapse the passage and stop their advance. Can you handle it?" She stared at the device, its blinking light a reminder of the danger it posed. Swallowing her fear, she nodded. "I can do it." "Good." He met her gaze, his expression serious. "Be fast, and don't get caught." Carla took the device and slipped away from the barricade, keeping low as she navigated the chaotic battlefield. The sounds of combat faded slightly as she moved toward the west corridor, her focus narrowing to the task at hand. Every step felt like a gamble, the risk of discovery pressing heavily on her shoulders. She reached the corridor and quickly identified the structural weak point Raymond had mentioned. Placing the charge against the wall, she activated the timer and stepped back. The blinking light accelerated, and she turned to leave, her pulse racing. A sharp shout from behind made her freeze. A rebel scout had spotted her, his weapon raised. Carla's mind screamed at her to run, but her body didn't move. The memory of Raymond's voice broke through her fear. "Pick your moments." The scout advanced, his weapon aimed directly at her. Carla gripped the stun baton tightly, her knuckles white. As he closed the distance, she forced herself to move, sidestepping his initial swing and jamming the baton into his side. The crackling energy surged through him, and he collapsed with a grunt. Carla didn't wait to see if he was down for good. She sprinted back toward the barricades, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The explosion shook the entire bay moments later, the corridor collapsing in a shower of debris. She stumbled but kept moving, relief flooding her as she reached the defenders. Raymond's sharp eyes met hers, and he gave her a quick nod of approval before turning his focus back to the fight. Carla sank to the ground behind the barricade, her body trembling from exertion. Despite the chaos, she felt a flicker of pride. She had done it. The rebels' advance slowed, but they weren't finished. More fighters poured into the bay, their numbers overwhelming the defenders' fragile line. Carla watched in horror as several refugees fell, their makeshift weapons no match for the rebels' superior firepower. Raymond stepped up, his cybernetic arm shielding a group of defenders as he fired relentlessly. But even he couldn't hold them off forever. Carla knew they were out of time. "We need to fall back," she shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. Raymond hesitated, his instincts warring with the grim reality of their situation. Finally, he nodded. "Everyone to the ships. Now." The defenders began retreating toward the remaining vessels, their movements frantic but coordinated. Carla helped guide them, her voice steady despite the fear threatening to consume her. The rebels pressed forward, sensing victory, but Raymond held the line, his defiance buying the refugees precious moments. As the last of the defenders boarded the ships, Carla turned to find Raymond. He was still in the thick of the fight, his plasma pistol empty as he engaged a rebel in hand-to-hand combat. The sight of him, battered but unyielding, sent a surge of emotion through her. "Raymond," she shouted, running toward him. He dispatched his opponent with a swift, brutal strike and turned to her, blood streaking his face. "What are you doing? Get to the ship." "I'm not leaving without you," she yelled, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the nearest vessel. For a moment, it seemed like they might make it. But as they reached the ramp, a rebel sniper took aim. The shot rang out, striking Raymond in the side. He staggered, his face contorted in pain, but he didn't fall. Carla screamed, grabbing him and dragging him onto the ship with the help of a few refugees. The vessel's engines roared to life, and they launched into space, leaving the burning colony behind. In the med bay, Carla hovered over Raymond as a medic worked to stabilize him. His eyes flickered open, and he managed a weak smile. "Told you. I'm not that easy to kill." She choked back a sob, her hand gripping his. "You saved us. You saved all of us." His smile faded, replaced by a pained but determined expression. "You saved them, Princess. Don't forget that." As the ship carried them to safety, Carla realized the truth of his words. She had made the choice to fight, to lead, and to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And in doing so, she had begun to earn the title she had once taken for granted. A new beginning. The ship glided silently through the void, the stars outside a cold and indifferent audience to the aftermath of the battle. Carla sat in the dimly lit med bay, her hands folded tightly in her lap as she watched the medic finish bandaging Raymond's side. His wounds were severe, but the fact that he was alive felt like a small miracle. She had never realized how much she relied on him until she saw him fall. "You should rest," the medic said, packing up their supplies. "He'll pull through, but he needs time." Carla nodded, though she didn't move. As the medic left, she looked down at Raymond, his usually sharp features softened by exhaustion. For the first time since their journey began, he looked vulnerable. She wasn't used to seeing him this way, it unsettled her more than she cared to admit. "You're still here," Raymond murmured, his voice rough but steady. His eyes fluttered open, meeting hers. "Of course I'm here," Carla replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Where else would I be?" He chuckled weakly, then winced at the movement. "Most people would have taken the first chance to run. Guess you're full of surprises." Carla's smile faded, replaced by a more serious expression. "I couldn't have done this without you. Any of it. You saved me, and I don't just mean today. Raymond's gaze softened, the walls he always kept around himself lowering just a fraction. You did more than you think, Princess. You stepped up when it mattered. The words carried a weight that Carla wasn't sure she was ready to bear, but she nodded nonetheless. We both did. The ship's small crew, a mix of refugees and former defenders, gathered in the central hold the following day. Their numbers were fewer than Carla would have liked, a painful reminder of the lives lost in the battle. Yet, despite their exhaustion and grief, there was a sense of unity among them, a shared determination to keep moving forward. Carla stood at the front of the group, her usual regal demeanor tempered by the experiences of the past few days. She didn't see herself as a princess anymore, not in the way she once had. She was something else now, something stronger, though still unpolished. We've lost so much, she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. Our home, our people, and for many of us, our families. But what we haven't lost is hope. We survived because we fought together, and that means something. The room was silent, every pair of eyes fixed on her. She took a deep breath and continued. I can't promise that things will get easier, or that we'll find safety anytime soon. But I can promise that I won't stop fighting for all of us. For the chance to rebuild, to live, and to prove that we're more than what the rebels, or anyone else, think we are. A ripple of murmured agreement swept through the group. Carla wasn't sure if it was enough, but it was a start. And for now, that was all they could ask for. In the days that followed, Carla found herself taking on a role she never anticipated. She worked alongside the refugees, helping repair the ship, ration supplies, and plan their next steps. It was a far cry from the life of luxury she had once known, but she found a strange satisfaction in it. For the first time, she felt like she was truly a part of something, rather than standing above it. Raymond, despite his injuries, was never far from her side. He coached her through difficult decisions, offering advice that was as blunt as it was invaluable. He still had his sharp edges, but there was a warmth to him now, a quiet respect that hadn't been there before. One evening, as they sat together in the ship's dimly lit galley, Carla turned to him with a question that had been nagging at her. What happens now? She asked. When we find a new place to settle, what will you do? Raymond leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Haven't decided yet. I'm not exactly built for peaceful living. Carla frowned. You could stay. With us. He raised an eyebrow. You think I belong in a colony of Zarian refugees? I think you belong wherever you choose to be, she said firmly. And I'd rather have you with us than out there on your own. For a moment, Raymond said nothing, his gaze searching hers. Then he smiled, a rare and genuine expression that softened the hard lines of his face. We'll see. The ship eventually found a new home, a hidden colony far from the reach of the rebels. It wasn't perfect, but it was a place to start over. Carla threw herself into the work of rebuilding, determined to create something better than the empire she had left behind. She still had much to learn, but she was no longer afraid of the challenge. Raymond, true to his word, stayed. He took on the role of protector and advisor, his experience invaluable to the fledgling community. Though he often grumbled about the mundane tasks he was assigned, there was a quiet pride in the way he watched the colony grow. In time, Carla and Raymond became an unlikely pair, partners in survival and in hope. They still argued, still clashed over their differences, but there was a mutual respect that ran deeper than words. Together, they forged a path forward, one step at a time. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Carla no longer feared it. She had found her strength, her purpose, and a reason to keep fighting. For her people. For herself. And for the future they were building together.